Hello everybody and welcome to my video on Bitcoin. Well, at least the introduction to my introduction on Bitcoin. So I'm taking a risk here discussing Bitcoin, and I know there's a lot of criticism on Bitcoin right now and everything's crashing and everybody's scared, which is why I was working on a much longer video. Um, but it's going to take multiple videos to just go through the assumptions of Bitcoin. So I will just try to make a shorter video first, and I'm calling it an intro to the intro. As always, none of this is investment advice, lifestyle advice. This is just entertainment. But nonetheless, I think there is one case that can be made for Bitcoin that everybody can agree on, and I think that that case alone can convince, not convince, but can lead traditional investors to agree that there is one major point for Bitcoin that makes Bitcoin very, very valuable, if not to people in the developed world, to people in the rest of the world. And that is property rights. I think that is one of the most compelling aspects of Bitcoin. Um, Bitcoin is my second largest position for many more reasons than just property rights. But I think property rights is a good way to begin an introduction for a series called Bitcoin for Skeptics, or an introduction of Bitcoin to skeptics. So please allow me to first speak like an economist, and economists have much longer list of assumptions. And so I'm just going to put my assumptions out there first, and keep in mind that each of these assumptions takes hours to demonstrate. So unfortunately, if you want to engage in this thought experiment about Bitcoin with me, you can't engage in it without having seen the multiple videos that would be warranted for each of these assumptions. So as economists say, there's assumptions. So what are the first assumption? Bitcoin is incorruptible and cannot be stopped. And there's a lot of reason for that. Bitcoin operates on a lower layer of the internet. It operates on layer 4, which is the TCP level, which is the same level as the web, right? It operates in a very basic level of bits and sending bits freely across the network, formerly called ARPANET. Like there's a whole reason why it can't be stopped. It's based on a lower level of computing that makes it very valuable and decentralized, to the point that Bitcoin can't be stopped, as well as the internet can't be stopped. Like Bitcoin could only be stopped if the internet stopped. And if the internet stopped for some reason or another, and we were to replug it in one day, Bitcoin would just get back on and walk again. So that's kind of one of the reasons. Another reason is Bitcoin is valuable. So I'll make a video about this, but there's about 1 billion people that have purchased Bitcoin out there, which is a huge statistics. There's 22% of Americans that own Bitcoin. Almost 50 million Americans own Bitcoin. So we have to make the assumption that Bitcoin is valuable to a great many. And it has begun the network effect adoption, which is the technological aspect as to why Bitcoin, I think, is a good investment, not investment advice. Bitcoin, assumption number 3, Bitcoin is autonomous code with preset rules and unchangeable rules. And no party can ever modify the code. And I suggest you look at everybody who has tried to modify the code of Bitcoin. That's why you have like 7 versions of Bitcoin, the true Bitcoin, and then 7 other ones that you've most likely never heard of because they always failed, because you can't modify the code. That was the whole point of block size war, which made Bitcoin a much less risky investment after the block size wars ended. And then assumption number 4 that I'm making is that you're using Bitcoin in a self-custodied way, because all of these platforms exploding, everything has to do with the fact that they went right back to counterparty risk, and they went right back to how the current banking system works, which is you have a counterparty risk. You give someone IOUs. There was not really Bitcoin owned by those crypto banks, and that's why it failed and collapsed like a house of cards. You have to self-custody. You have to own the asset directly. You can't own it through a bank And frankly, it's so easy to own Bitcoin on your own. It's tough to understand why this bubble of people owning assets in Bitcoin banks because they want interest on their Bitcoin, which is again not interesting at all. Bitcoin. Bitcoin is deflationary technology. Bitcoin does not need interest. There's no counterparty. But anyways, if you accept all of these assumptions, then we can talk about property rights. And knowing that I could make hours of videos on each of these assumptions, and there's hundreds of serious Bitcoin channels with very, very serious, very educated people who explain this in great technical, philosophical, game theoretical depth, right? Bitcoin, unfortunately, gets associated with what I call the crypto bros, and people saying, "Oh, pump and dump, let's pump for Bitcoin." No, 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 no. Like this, Bitcoin is different. It's a different technology. It's a site. It's the monetary layer of the internet. It is built at the same level as TCP, the Transfer Control Protocol, TCP/IP, and this is a BP, the Bitcoin protocol. It is inherently strong. It is a very, very strong framework. And all these assumptions, keep in mind, they are backed by math and code, which underlie these assumptions. They're not random claims that I'm making or that Bitcoiners are making. In fact, if you speak to true Bitcoiners, they never intend to sell it. They never intend to sell it because it's not about how many dollars you can buy with one Bitcoin. It's about everything can be quoted in Bitcoin and bought in Bitcoin. It's an entirely different mindset. And Bitcoin, and I think this is very important to understand, it's an engineered system that is built on the first law of thermodynamics. It is a system that does not leak. It is not opaque. It is verifiable. It does not leak. Um, like the traditional banking system, and especially if you look at the euro dollar system or the euro system in general for other currencies, ledgers held by banks and other ledgers and no ledger corresponding to another ledger. This is not that with Bitcoin. There is only a single ledger with all transactions. So anyways, now that I'm done with my assumptions, and I'm just assuming that we agree on these assumptions because I can't cover them in video, I'm moving on as to why I think one of the many reasons why I believe Bitcoin is a great investment, not investment advice. One of the many reasons is it gives you property rights. Bitcoin gives you code-based property rights. So Bitcoin is in a way it's a redefinition of property. It's I could argue it's the invention of real property because Bitcoin has a lot of benefits. One of them is Bitcoin is unseizable. It's absolutely unseizable. It's money that you store in your mind with a string of 12 words with a BIP wallet, a BIP wallet. Of course, you're storing a public and a private key, but you can transcript that in a set of 12 words that then you just remember. Or if you don't want to remember, you write it somewhere and bury it in the backyard. Or you share it between two different locations that only know where the code is at. But it is the idea that you can store all of your wealth, all of your savings in speech, which is why it's very powerful. You can store all of your wealth, all of your savings in speech. So that's a fundamental difference. No one can steal speech from you. No one can steal Bitcoin from you. Unlike gold or cash, like if you held cash or gold in your hands, there's always opportunities for theft. There's opportunities for theft from, assault and thieves. There's opportunities for theft in the context of war. Countries have gone into war with one another for gold for millennia. And if we were to switch to a money where wealth cannot ever be seized, that would be absolutely tremendous. So there's a big philosophical section about Bitcoin and the role it has to prevent any sort of violence. Jason Lowery is one of the big guys in that studies that, and it's very, very, very serious stuff. I'm talking, PhD, high level people, not crypto bros. And then you can't also get it stolen by either the law, either the state, or a judge. Like no judge, no law, no state can seize your Bitcoin. It is not possible. They can kill you and not get the Bitcoin, which is crazy. Which is crazy to think about. It's like it's not possible to take the property away from you. It's not. It's not possible because it's stored in the form of language, and it's language that you either put in your brain or that you share between two pieces of metal that you bury at two ends of a backyard. So it's knowledge, and you can't take knowledge. You can take thoughts away. Um, and this is one thing that you could argue when I say that this is the first time that you actually have an enforceable property, right? Because, for example, if someone were to engage in the most common form of theft today, which is cyber theft, cyber security, if you want to hack Bitcoin, I calculated for a long format of video. If you want to hack Bitcoin, you need to gather the equivalent of 7 nuclear plants of instantaneous energy. So that right there is probably $20 billion. And then you also need to acquire about $8 billion worth of mining equipment. And by the way, you need to probably pull that off within a month or two, because the rate at which the hash rate, i.e. the security of a network, moves is exponential itself. In fact, it has 20x in less than 5 years. It has gone 20 times. The network is 20 times more secure. So, and that is based on the laws of physics. You can't hack it because it is a proof of work system where only hard work can break the system. You can't. There's no easy way to break the system. There is only a very, very, very hard way to break the system. And whereas you could have broken the system of Bitcoin within the first few years of Bitcoin, now the size it has reached, the size of the hash network is so big that it is the most secure system in the world. Anyways, I could go on this, but it is very important to realize that the biggest army of computers, the biggest army of lawyers, the biggest army of states would not be able to take away Bitcoin. And this is very important when you talk about transmitting wealth, i.e. saved time and energy, when you're talking about transmitting this in the future, transmitting it 100 years from now. Like, it's very, very important when you think about that. So property rights are a big reason as to why people buy Bitcoin. And I know the rebuttal. The common rebuttal is, oh, I live in the US or I live in Europe, I'm safe. And yes, I mostly agree. That's why Bitcoin is not my number one position, it's my number two position. Because I mostly agree, but I think we're still mostly safe in the US. But that is definitely not true for the rest of the world. That is not true for the rest of the world at all. And for, frankly, decent countries like Cyprus, Lebanon used to be called the pearl of the Middle East. It was one of the best countries in the Middle East. And you have withdrawal limits. You can't get your money out from the banks. Cyprus, right? European country, not some crazy emerging country. The U.S. did that in 1934 by removing by preventing financial institutions to hold gold, and the gold that these financial institutions had belonged to their clients. So yes, we are mostly safe, but this is a global asset. Bitcoin is a global brand, and as a global brand, we have to understand the value proposition to the whole world, and there's 95% of the people live outside of the US. So property rights make sense to a bunch of people, while it may not make sense for us. That's why Bitcoin resonated so much in China, so much. And if you actually look at transactions, it's still resonating in China. It's like you can't stop Bitcoin. It is as secure as the internet, or as unstoppable as the internet. And you know, countries that have currency controls, they are this is a disruptor of that. This is a major disruptor. It's the first time that we have true property rights. And if you don't, I mean, if you don't have Bitcoin in your portfolio, you're not protected against that risk of not having property. Like it's like, if you really think about it at a fundamental level, the only property that you have is the property that can be defended. Property only exists to the extent that it can be defended. And so even the richest person in the world can't defend their wealth against an army. They can't defend their bank accounts against the government going against them. Look at what happened with Saudi Arabia and Ben Salman, and people being put at the top of that tower of a Hilton for, like, 6 or 7 months, and he was asking for money to the billionaires of Saudi Arabia. Like you can't protect your wealth. Your wealth, your money, what you own only exists to the extent that you can protect it. And Bitcoin offers the best protection for an asset that has ever existed. Much more protected than any legal system and any state, because it is code. And because code is law and code is unbreakable, and this unbreakable code is backed by insane computing power called miners. And these miners, they create a physics barrier, a physics-based barrier to any people trying to compromise the network. They use energy. It is linking money to energy. It's a fascinating concept. That's why I always say this is going to be a field of study, I think, for the next 50 years. This is going to be a field where we get PhDs and where we get debates, and it's, I don't think it's going away. I really don't think it's going away. So let me move on from property rights. So property rights is a big one, but so property rights, right, can be stolen. So that's the one number. My point number one on property rights is property rights are only as good as you can defend them. And so with Bitcoin, you can defend them because you have an army of computers protecting it from you, and it can't be taken by force, and it can't be taken by death, it can't be taken by courts, by anything. It can't be taken away from you unless you willingly give away your code. That's the only moment where it could be taken away. But that's not the only way that property rights are altered. So property rights can be stolen. Your property can be stolen, but your property can also be an illusion. And your property becomes an illusion where when what you own is actually not nothing, when you actually don't own what you think you own. So for example, most dollars, stored in banks are actually IOUs. That's what dollars are. They're not at the bank. The bank uses it back, right? It's money is debt. Money is debt. When you have money at a bank, you are the counterparty of that bank, and if that bank goes bankrupt, there's FDIC up to $250,000 to come and pay you that money that you lost. But if you're more than that, then you're done. And again, that's in the U.S. You may have seen in the other slide I showed you all of these banks, that did these haircuts and took so much money from bank accounts, but withdrawal halts. That's an example of counterparty risk. If you have counterparty risk, if what you own is the illusion of money and not money, then you have to trust the other party. That's why banks build these beautiful buildings, because you have to trust. You have to trust them. Otherwise, there's no bank run. But the same is true for stocks. If you really, really think about it, how many of us actually own stock in our name. Most of us don't. Most of us own stock in street name. And there's some people that sell like real stock in the form of paper for novelty, as novelty items, but most stocks are owned in street name. So again, at the fundamental level, if your broker goes bankrupt, did you really own any stocks? And so that's what, and again, it hasn't happened in a very long time. The US is a great country to live in. It's very safe. It's highly regulated. But think about it as a worldwide asset. Some people can't own stocks because the institutions are not as developed, because the IOU, the counterparty risk, is just too high. And the same is true for another type of property, such as physical property. Same. So physical property, it can be taken away from you by force, but also by taxation. Let me add that, can be taken away by taxation. If you pay a 2% a year property tax, your property, you're losing 2% ownership of your property each year. So again, you own a physical property, sure, but do you really own it if you have the risk of expropriation, and if you have then leaking, taking away 2% of the top of your property in the form of property tax? Do you really own it? And that's in contrast with Bitcoin, which is like the only thing I can think of that you can truly own. And again, the law is strong in the West. And I love that. It's great. The law is strong. But even if the law is strong, the law is slow-paced at times. And you almost always rely on a third party to enforce the law. So just because you go into the justice system and the judge says, oh yeah, you're right, XYZ owes you money, congratulations, you won, you still have to enforce that. So you have to go to a collection agency to enforce that. So it's not a wall of encrypted energy protecting you. It's not code protecting you. It's the law system. It's the bank's counterparty measures, but it's not code. You're not protected by you're not protected by physical power in the form of energy. And Bitcoin protects you in the form of energy. You have the protection. You have insane protection in the form of energy encryption, where you're protected when you buy Bitcoin, because again, nobody can hack Bitcoin because of the assumption that I was telling you earlier that I hope I will develop. So you're protected by energy. And so what happens, right, if the law is slow to enforce? I mean, the classic example is you get into rental real estate, you have a tenant, and all of a sudden the tenant stops paying rent. And of course, you're going to get your house back, but it could be a while. And in the meantime, you yourself, you can go bankrupt. Now, again, the law probably should be faster, but it's never going to be as good as the encryption of Bitcoin. That does not let counterparty risk happen at all in the first place. So what I can say is that Bitcoin is a bearer asset. It's a bearer asset in the digital world. It is stored in the form of speech. So as long as you remember the combination, you own it in your mind, in your brain. I mean, it's stunning. It's mind-blowing, really. It's really mind-blowing. And then point number 3. And this is the point that most people hammer home a lot about Bitcoin, is that, and people say, oh, that's not true, Bitcoin didn't protect against inflation, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, people are not looking with the right time frame. The right time frame to look at Bitcoin is 100 years. It is not 2 years, right? And that's why people in the Bitcoin community say 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, because it is enduring. It is an enduring asset can withstand the attack of physical armies, legal armies, government armies, cybersecurity computer armies. It's code. It will outlive any system that may fail. And so the US, once again, is a very strong system. And I'm not saying that would ever happen in the US. But there's a lot of nations that don't have strong systems. So this is creating a lot of appeal to a lot of people in emerging nations where they don't have that guarantee that we enjoy here. So that's one thing, right? It will appeal to a lot of people. Then the dollar, and this is why I named the channel "Beat the Denominator." That's why I figured I would have to talk about Bitcoin one day or another. The dollar is getting printed, is inflating at 15% a year, and I suggest you watch my video on M2, which is what most people often refer to when they talk about the dollar growth, and M2 has slowed down because of quantitative tightening right now. But euro dollar is bigger than M2. And the euro dollars feeds back into the US system. So just because the US has decided to be virtuous for the past, 9 months, doesn't mean the euro dollar has decided to be virtuous. Plus, really, when we talk about interest rate, that doesn't matter as much as the fact that commercial lending is where the bulk of the money is created. Money is created for commercial lending. And so that still goes on. And so on average, for the longest time, it's been about 8%. But over the past 10 years, money growth has been crazy, and especially over the past 2 years. And now it's slowed down. But my thesis on this channel is that QE will have to come back because the deficit of the US will be multiple trillions in 2023, and the Fed will have to buy. There is no other way around. Japan and China have other issues, and they are looking at their own currencies, and they're not buyers of bonds. Or not as much as they used to be. They don't buy as much bonds as they used to be. So anyways, that's another point. Gold was the hardest money before Bitcoin. Let us be reminded that gold has been the money of the world for hundreds and hundreds of years before Roosevelt seized the gold from banks. Like gold was the main money, right? That's why we had the Gilded Age and all of that. Like gold used to be a pretty good money. But gold had its flaws. One flaw is that it's not nearly as hard to mine as BTC. Like, gold is about 2% extra gold each year. But one of the problem with gold is that gold can be mined more quickly as price goes up. So whenever the price of gold goes up, miners crank the mining machines and they mine more gold. So Bitcoin is not this way. Bitcoin is on a timed schedule. It's every 10 minutes, 6.25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes are issued. It's on a time schedule, and Bitcoin has a diminishing supply of new Bitcoin. So right now, the inflation rate of Bitcoin is 1.8%, right? When the halving comes in 2024, it will be 0.9%. That's how Bitcoin works. Plus Bitcoin is deflationary because, and I'll say this in the next slide, why Bitcoin is actually deflationary. But the Bitcoin supply is lower than that of gold. And it's definitely lower than that of the US dollar. And I'm not even talking about the network effects. I'm not talking about the brand. I'm not talking about all of the reasons why we need the money for the internet. I'm just talking about the money supply here. So it's money that can move freely for time because you're guaranteed that one Bitcoin today is 1/21 millionth of the money supply. And in 1,000 years from now, one Bitcoin will also be 1/21 millionth of the money supply. So you have the same share. Your share of the money supply doesn't change. And in fact, your share of the money supply increases because as people lose access to their Bitcoin for XYZ reason, they lose the keys, when they die, they decide to not redeem or use the money, and if they do that, that's like charity to the monetary system. If all of this happens, actually the money is deflationary, which is it's an asset that is engineered to be fixed, which is stunning. It's fascinating. It's a money created by engineers. It's not a money created by economists, and so it works differently. Works very differently. And so, like I said, there's less of it each year. It is estimated because people die and sometimes don't pass on their keys, or because people lose their keys. It's estimated that only about 15 million BTC will freely circulate ever. Only about 15 million. So even though the advertised supply is 21 million, and we say infinity, infinity divided by 21 million is what most Bitcoiners say. Actually, it's probably closer to 14, 15 million-ish. And Bitcoin is programmed for a deflationary world. And I have this nice example here about our inflationary world that we live in, the inflation that we have in this world. And this is Jay Powell saying that 6 months ago to Congress. He said, which I thought it was interesting. He said, "Oh, inflation is primarily a monetary phenomenon." Jay Powell, said that because we know that, inflation is a monetary phenomenon. It's because commercial banks create more money, and the money stock, all of the dollars out there increase at a crazy pace, and there's more dollars out there. And so that's why we see prices go up. But that is not, first of all, that is unfortunate. And so we don't care too much about inflation in the short term because we have our short-term lenses. But I think this is a striking example. You may be familiar with Sears homes. Sears homes, to me, is one of the most striking examples of inflation. This is a 1911 Sears home. So this home was $1,700. $1,700 for this nice five-bedroom house in 1911. And today that same home is $375,000. It's the exact same home. And so, of course, you may remove the value of the lot. And so you may remove 50, 60 on the lot. But it's well over 100x. And it's really crazy. It's really crazy. Charlie Munger, one of the biggest haters of Bitcoin, said himself, the only thing that you can be certain of is that over a period of 100 years, the currency is going to zero. Well, yeah, because commercial banks are creating currency every time there's a new loan. Every time you go out to get a mortgage, new money is created. So yes, that is why we have long-term inflation. That's because of that. And actually, Bitcoin is programmed for the modern world. Bitcoin is programmed for the entrepreneurial Austrian economic world, where actually our species gets more efficient. We get more efficient every year. Companies get more efficient every year. And so if the money supply was fixed, all we would see is prices go down every year. Prices would go down every year because of technological gains if the money supply was fixed. The reason why prices don't go down every year is because our money supply grows really fast. And we have growth in monetary stock, and we have monetary inflation. And monetary inflation really causes real world inflation. But if we had a fixed money like Bitcoin, your Bitcoin would buy you more over time. And then from a philosophical standpoint, if your Bitcoin buys you more over time, it also creates an entirely new mindset as to how one should save and how money should be invested. It creates long-term thinkers. Like there's a whole psychological, philosophical change that happens once the money doesn't devalue, once the benefits of technology make prices cheaper. And Keynesian economics tell us the contrary. They tell us, oh, that's well, if prices get cheaper, people will not buy anything. Except, I happen to believe that it's a lie. People buy stuff. People need stuff. People need a lot of stuff, and there's clear examples. People still buy TVs. They buy plenty of TVs, in fact, and TVs get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper every single year. We buy stuff regardless of inflation. We buy stuff because we have needs to be fulfilled. That's the reason. That's the reason why we buy stuff. Anyways, that's a tangent. I'm sorry about the tangent, but I hope maybe to talk about Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics and why I think Austrian economics is superior. But anyways, thank you so much. I hope you see my point here. And my point here is that property rights are a bigger deal to most of the world. And Bitcoin provides property rights to everybody. And it provides, for the first time, I would argue, property rights, because the property rights of Bitcoin are a definition that even we in the West don't have. Even in the West, we don't have the property rights that Bitcoin affords us and grants us. And Bitcoin grants us property rights that are the next level or the next stage of property rights, which are rooted in code and cannot ever be changed. Again, none of this was investment advice. If you don't like crypto or Bitcoin, please don't blame me. I took a risk. I want to talk a little bit about Bitcoin. But just understand that I'm not a crypto bro or anything like that. I've studied Bitcoin for actually more than 1,400 hours, because I've done the count for my next video. I've done the count of how much time I spent studying Bitcoin. I've been in Bitcoin since 2014, and then in 2015 I sold off my Bitcoin for 250, and I thought I was really smart. And that's something you'll see in the Bitcoin community. Like many of the early Bitcoiners, they sold their Bitcoin because, the pressure from like the anti-disruption sentiment for Bitcoin is so insane. There is people don't like Bitcoin still. Bitcoin is an emerging asset. It's a contrarian asset. But it's changing, and it's going to change. And I think property rights is going to be a reason why it changes, because it's a use case. It fills a use case. It fills a need that no other asset can possibly fill. No other asset can possibly fill the void that Bitcoin is trying to fill with money that cannot be seized and taken away from you, even by the largest army you could imagine. So anyways, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please follow me on Twitter if you can. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Not investment advice. Have a great day.